Hello. I wanted to take a little bit and talk about my book, Good Intentions. It's been a little over a year since I finished it, and I haven't done a whole lot with it, but I'm going to try to change that now. I just started going back and revising it and looking it over, and, that's going to be done here soon, so I wanted to talk a little about it. I often get asked why I write and what my novel is about. Good Intentions comes from a number of different things. Part of it was it helped me deal with my grief after my grandmother died. And that was a dark period for me. And writing really helped me to cope. Another aspect of Good Intentions is that I try to encompass everyday life. I look at the news and people do some pretty messed up things, but there's also good in the world, so I try to shine a balance, I would say, between light and darkness and try to present the world as I see it, or not really as I see it, but sort of like it how it is. So in my novel there's really not a villain or antagonist per se, but the characters in their own way are their own antagonists, their own protagonists. Their actions mostly form out of good intentions, but their actions spiral down and lead them down this dark path, and every action interferes with another character. So, my book isn't a happy book, but I think it's a real book. There's violence, death, profanity, but there's also, I think, an underlying sense of optimism and hope, and I think that's important. Anyways, I wanted to read you the first chapter of my book. There's a little bit of cussing, so take that as you will. Anyways, hold on a sec. Alright. In those days, Israel had no king. Judges 17:6. Spring. Evelyn Tesson. The sun rose over Little Bell, shining through the blinds in room 13 of the Graywood Motel. Little Bell's small number of about 1,000 citizens went about their normal day in Paradise County. 2 police officers drifted slowly up the road in a cruiser. A little boy walked around trying to capture butterflies while under the watchful eye of an older boy. The rumbling of a gray old automobile caused the boy to look up for a moment as the stranger flew through the town, leaving behind the strong odor of gasoline. Mr. Waters opened up the Waters General Store and shouted angrily from his store at 3 passing teens. Near the Graywood Motel stood an empty lot. A mailbox stood half decrepit with the name Dagon across it. A blackbird flew down from above, perching on the mailbox. It peered out, observing all of the individual lives intermingling in the town. It squawked as loud as a raven, but it did not make itself known among the town. People continued along their way as if it was invisible to their eyes. It squawked again, the sun glinting against its eyes and turning them into fiery coals. It sniffed the air, pointing its beak across the town, and stopped at the Graywood Motel. Its claws cracked against the metal like scythes. It paused for a moment. nodded toward the building, and took flight into the sky. His inky robe floated across the blue heavens, and it disappeared from whence it came. No one was any wiser, and life continued as always under the loom. Newspapers fluttered across the streets, in the breeze, revealing the assuring face of Mayor Steiner. In his black and white print, he assured the people that better times were ahead. Flipping the pages, a person would find that better times looked as distant as ever. The government was in a civil war for power. A recession was tearing downwind, destroying everything in the process. A still photograph reveals Sergeant Duncan wouldn't be coming home for Christmas this year, or any year for that matter. Across town, in the back alleyways, a steady decay was brewing to the surface. Junkies turned their arms black as sludge with needle marks. Some honest, everyday citizens were taking up knives and guns and stealing their way into financial security. Women enticed men with their shadowy figures. Children were at home starving to bones for some, and for others the thrill of a trip to Narnia waited for a price. There was always a price for everything. It made a person wonder how a precious scrap of paper could be traded for a life. Maybe Marx was right, one might say. Hell no, he wasn't, another would say. Everyone dreamed of the light shimmering of gold. Some watched the city not too far away with hopeful optimism. Maybe they could escape to there, the land of glittering lights. Those that came from the city knew better than to have such hope. The city was 4 times as much struggle and twice as much hopeful optimism for the country. How can that be? The people would cry when they heard this. How can the city be any worse than the country? If this was the case, then what did they have left to hope for? To the future, a few would murmur, and the whole crowd would agree. They dreamed of flying machines and robots that made life easier. This time in 20 years there would be trips to Mars, and aliens beaming them to the other side of the universe. Everyone would be comfortable in their futuristic spacesuits, and hunger and war would be the way of the past. None of them realized that 20 years prior, their predecessors were looking forward to the future. Things don't change that much as they would realize in 20 years' time. The curtains were drawn in room 13, blocking away all of the sun and the setup of the coming Samuel Proctor festival. It was dark within, but darkness receding away from the halo surrounding the window. A woman lay on the bed with her head against the headboard. She would have appeared to be sleeping if her eyes didn't dully blink in the darkness. She was a pitiful sight. Her blonde hair was frayed in every direction and knotted and woven in the manner of an Easter basket. Her face was smudged with worn makeup. Eyeliner had dripped down her face and dried, forming long stains. Her lips were formed in a cherry-red smile stretching upward to her cheeks. She was slender, with a small nose and glassy eyes. She wore one heel on one foot, and on the other a sneaker, and she couldn't decide whether the heel was more appropriate or the sneaker more comfortable. Her figure was draped in a long gray dress. Deep scars on each wrist highlighted her past. She smelled of liquor, but not of her own accord. The stench had simply clung to her from the bed. She cleared her throat with as much enthusiasm as visiting the doctor or standing in line for a long while. Bags lay beside her, a carry-on and duffel bag. Within this luggage were the only possessions she had to her name. She was dirt poor, stricken to the lowest of poverty. She had no job, she acknowledged glumly with a cough. She had no family left in the world. Her heart remained in ribbons on the ground. She had not the energy to scoop them up, nor the glue to piece them together again. With so little left, she decided to lay within her own mind shielded in the darkness away from the world and all of its problems. To enter her thoughts would be to rewind by 10 years. She used to work in the theater back before it closed down. She was an actress that commanded the audience. She could sway and flow off the moods around her to dramatic effect. It seemed like life was going somewhere, like she was heading somewhere. She used to dazzle. The air was once electrified with the excitement that comes with youth. She had met Jack when she was only 23. He had come to see her show. "Hello," he said in a gruff voice, slicking back his dirty blonde hair. "That was quite a performance. You look so beautiful up there on stage." He stood outside, the theater glowing in the halo of the sun's rays. He was holding an assortment of roses in one hand, beckoning out toward her. He wore a brown leather jacket and blue jeans. There was no reason she should have taken a fancy to him, but she did. "Thank you," she gasped in admiration. She blushed, rubbing her fingers together. She weakly rubbed her fingers across the scars on her wrist. She had something of a turbulent childhood. Flashes of red and blue filled her memory. A police officer was carting away an older man in his 40s. "It's going to be okay. Don't worry, Evelyn," he told her as the patrol car door shut. She dropped her teddy bear, crying out for her father as the car drove away, leaving her in its smoke. That was the last time she ever saw that man. It wasn't till years later she realized how much he had screwed up her life. "It's gonna be okay," Jack said, holding her. The two stood outside the theater. It was a cold, bitter winter. The first truly bitter winter she had felt in many years. The parking lot was empty except for them. The barren theater, empty and quiet, loomed over them. "How's it going to be okay?" she asked, hugging Jack. "We're not going to be able to get the house. We're going to lose the one that we do have. We're ruined, Jack. We're ruined." Jack and she talked about buying a house and starting a family. They had found the perfect house in Little Bell. The charm of the little town had made an impact. The two were living in Evan, a town near the city at the time. When she saw the empty house on Peters Street, she knew that was the one for her. She would be there on the front porch in 30 years, waving her children in. Her laughter would fill its walls come Christmas, and she would make her bed near its fireplace on cold evenings. Everything was going perfect, she cried bitterly. All things in her life were finally going to plan when the recession hit. No one wanted to go to the shows anymore. People were fighting to work and for food. There just wasn't any money left for imagination of the show. There wasn't any money left to keep the lights shining. She watched, tearful, as the lights proclaiming Evelyn Tesson, the star, went dark. She became plaster. She became stone. That house on Peter Street would remain empty for now. Her dreams would have to wait as puffs of purple smoke above the world in those velvety heavens. "We'll make it, Eve," Jack assured her optimistically. "There are things are going to bounce back eventually. We'll get our dream home, and we're gonna be alright." "Damn it, Evelyn! When are you done come back to reality?" Jack yelled from across the room, smashing a coffee cup against the floor. He stood in the shadows of a dimming fireplace, an angry dog. His face was unkempt and wrinkled with stress. He walked with a limp, pacing the room back and forth. "I'm doing my best here, aren't I? No one wants to hire someone with a bum knee. We could use the money. Not like this. Not working for those people on Grim Street." She sputtered, shaking her head angrily. You know what Sarah said about? Who gives a rat's ass what Sarah has to think? Tell me, what did Sarah think when her husband iced that sap? Does she have anything to say on that? Jack argued, turning a plume of red. He sat down on the couch, sighing. He stared into the burning embers of the fire. In a more calm voice he said, Eve, I have no choice. We're going to be a couple of bums on Harlot's corner. Fine. You do whatever you want, Evelyn yelled, leaving the room and slamming the door to the one-bedroom apartment behind her. Evelyn remembered how cold the air felt as she walked up the street. She was carrying a pocket knife with her. The area was full of shady characters, the likes the theater could never dare imagine. She had spent her teenage years on streets like that before her big breakthrough. When she became Evelyn Tesson, she had locked away that bitter anger and had glimmered as a perfect flower, but the years since had brought such bitterness back. Tessa, a young, hopeful-eyed boy breathed. Evelyn stirred in bed, wiping her damp forehead with her hands. She kicked the blankets off her, scratching her legs. The world around her trod in circles. She reached for a glass of water, but knocked it over, spilling it to the floor. She sat up, her legs wobbling. She tried to stand, but she lurched backwards. Her back arched. Her stomach rumbled, rolling over as her bed spun around in circles. She crawled to the edge of the bed, peeking her head forward, and vomited on the carpet rug. She rolled back over, holding her head as it pulsated. She held it, whispering nursery rhymes from her youth to ease the pain. And if life was but a dream, if life was but a dream, she groaned to herself. Evelyn was walking back down the street corner after a fight with Jack. Jack had been out of sorts in the months and years following his accident at the mill. The hospital bills and costs for that pointless court battle had nearly drained them of all their finances. Go work for a couple bums on Harlot's. Go work for a couple meth heads, she cursed and had muttered to herself. Idiot's gonna wind up in the dirt or in prison. Why should I care? Just gonna spend all of it on some more pills. Kill himself one way or the other. I'll wind up on Harlot's corner either way. As she walked, a grungy vagrant staggered to her, holding a handful of either fake or stolen jewelry. Hello, gorgeous. See anything you like? He gestured toward her. This ring would look good on that lovely hand. Evelyn didn't even look at him. She kept walking forward, staring ahead. Baby, how about these gold earrings? The vagrant pitched, spitting in the road. Evelyn snarled at him. Screw off. I look like I got any money? She said, continuing to walk away from the vagrant. The whole world was crazy and she didn't need any more following her around. The vagrant was taken back. He grumbled. A sweet thing like you shouldn't be using language like that. Evelyn jammed open the pocket knife, pointing it at the vagrant. I said, leave me alone. Evelyn blinked. Her hand wavered weakly above her head in the dark. She allowed it to fall, resting on her chest. She coughed, sitting up in bed. The sun was midway to going down now. A fireball of orange and red erupted violently in the air, tearing up the sky. It shone through her curtains, dissolving everything in an orange hue. She stared bewitched, holding her stomach in the warm brace of her arm. Evelyn remembered a moment in which the sky went ablaze in a similar fashion. She was sitting beside Jack with the top down in their convertible. Me and my pap used to go up to the mountains. We'd spend the weekend up there fishing and hunting, Jack breathed, staring off into the distance. Some nights when the sky was clear, I would sit down by the lake and watch the sun go down. I would listen to the world at peace with itself. She remembered his breath smelled like peppermints rather than liquor. She seemed to remember him taking her hand and the two drifting through the honey-tinged clouds. That cannot be right, she thought. The memory was too pure, too bright to possibly be real. It reminded her of those times on stage when she had become the character. She had created a detailed backstory for each, but she could separate it from reality. The memory reminded her of one of those backstories, like she was still on stage in character. She stirred from her bed, careful to avoid the spoiled spot on the rug. Her feet were unnaturally large, like clown shoes. She made her way to the bathroom. She stared at herself in the mirror. She looked horrible, she thought. She felt horrible. Turning on the water, she cupped water into her hands, splashing herself in the face. She ran her fingers across her cheeks and lips, wiping away the makeup. The water turned a gray and reddish color going down the drain. Last night was supposed to be a special night, she thought. Her eyes flickered down to a pregnancy test laying on the sink. She knocked it to the ground. What was she going to do? She felt queasy again. Dry heaving, she struggled not to throw up. She splashed herself with water again, hoping that would ease her bouts of nausea. She repressed tears, wiping her eyes with her hand. She had cringed enough in the past 24 hours. She moved in a waddle forward, heading toward the window. She took a seat in the chair and watched the sun until her eyes watered. She bent her head low to her lap as echoes danced in her head. She still heard Jack's reassuring voice consoling her into security. She heard dishes shattering and a tambourine of clattering. A knife loomed in her mind, threatening her. The knife was always there. It had always been there since her daddy went and left her in that plume of smoke. It had been there in the bathroom all those years ago when it had gave her those scars on her wrist. She thought she had discarded it for a while. She thought she could escape the knife. But it had reared itself when she least expected it, taking a new and more twisted form. "What happened to you, Jack?" she had cried, running from the house with her bags packed. She had drew a line in the sand over the past few years. Every time Jack would cross it, she would tell herself she'd leave. Finally, there were just too few lines left to cross. Then she was gone. She touched her stomach dejectedly. Images of her sitting in a rocking chair at the house on Peter Street turned into a smoke trail following a fleeing police cruiser. Her children would be coming home to greet her and Jack. She would be smiling and laughing. She would be happy if that day came. "It never will," she said to herself emotionlessly. Sometimes she walked by that house just to look and see what could have been. A family had moved into the house during the past half-decade. She caught glimpses of them smiling and laughing. She saw a normal life free from poverty and desolation. She saw a life she could never have. What kind of life would that be for a baby? She asked herself miserably. Growing up in such a cold world of thugs, thieves, and horrors would only give it a short, miserable life. She could take the pain. She was accustomed to it by now. But a baby would only suffer. It would starve and cry and see such wretchedness. She rationalized, scratching against her armrest. It'd be the child of Jack, the deranged junkie, rather than Jack, the enduring man she met years ago. Her face hardened at the thought, and so did her heart too. A drastic, irreversible solution flickered on the edge. She had a choice to make, and she had very little time to do so. Whew, that was a mouthful. But anyways, that's the first chapter. It's broken down by seasons, and it follows these people in this small town and how their lives interconnect over a year. So it follows Evelyn, her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend Jack, and then there's the Wells family, and it focuses mainly on corruption in law enforcement, drugs, and I think the main centralized question is how far does one's actions take them, and where do they end up at the end? And it's about a question of whether these people can be redeemed, and basically what does it mean to be good or evil. I think that really sums it up. But yeah, tell me what you think, whether you hated it or liked it or didn't care. Cool.